Welcome to Simplilearn. We're honored to have you join us today for Practical Risk Management Steps for the Threat Hunter with your host, Dr. James Stanger. My name is Richard, and after this intro, I'll be mostly in the background helping Dr. Stanger so that everything goes smooth. I'll also be, I'll also be there helping to fill the questions from the QA at the end. So make sure you feed us some good questions that you have for Dr. Stanger. Practical Risk Management Steps for the Threat Hunter. Cybersecurity is the biggest growing field today. If you do not know Dr. James Stanger has 20-plus years experience in the industry as Chief Technology Evangelist, currently consultant under Stanger Network Consulting. Previously with CompTIA, Certification Partners, Chair, LPI Advisor Council, and as a PhD from the University of California, Riverside. For those who aren't familiar with this form of webinar, I want to introduce you to your dashboard. Excuse me, I do have a bit of a head cold. If everybody could go locate their Q&A, and if you would just be so kind as to test it out, this also lets us know that our volume is working, that you have audio. Just type in hello and let Dr. Stanger know that you're here and you're excited to see him. If you can find that QA module, it'll be off to the right in the lower part. You can click on it and type in hello. And good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. Let's see what we got here. Good. It sounds like we have clear audio and video. I just go and scroll down. Okay, excellent. So put your questions in there. As we're going through, if you hear something on there, let us know what your questions are, and we'll fill those at the end. Excuse me. And we'll reserve a 15-minute period for the Q&A at the end. If you hear something awesome, brilliant, interesting, insightful, and you want to share that in your social channels, whatever your social channels are, Facebook, LinkedIn, tweet, you can use the hashtag SLWebinars. That way people can find it and you'll make them wish they were here. You didn't come here to listen to me. I'm proud to introduce Dr. James Stanger. He'll be your host for Practical Risk Management Steps for the Threat Hunter. So go ahead and sit back, relax. If it's early morning, enjoy a cup of coffee or tea, or maybe it's evening and you can sit back with a glass of wine. Let's go ahead and get Dr. James on. Give us just a moment to transfer rights over to him, and we'll pull him up and dive right in. So let's give us just a moment here. It takes a minute to pass the rights over there. There we go.
Great. Let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. So let's see if I'll even share just an application. Let's give that a shot. Okay. And can you see my screen, everybody? Just let me know. So it should say risky business.
Correct. I have clear audio and video on this side. So I'll go ahead and mute myself and enjoy.
Hey, thank you so much for the introduction. I really appreciate it, sir. So everybody, welcome here. My name is James Stanger, and thanks for the nice overview there. I've done a lot of work over the years with penetration testing and Linux and open source, network administration, various things. If you wish, you can follow me up on Twitter at James Stanger, all one word. And you can also go up to CompTIA and check out this my news hub. It's basically where I put together all of the thoughts that I've been doing. So you can follow me and what CompTIA are up to. I also want to point out that you can grab this PowerPoint slide deck. I'll make a link available to you, so if you want the slide deck, you can have it. So I'm curious, folks, just from a perspective of curiosity, where are you in terms of your job? Tell me what you are. Are you an IT worker already in the field? Are you a security worker, cybersecurity worker? Or are you looking for a job already? Just curious to see where you are. So if you could put that into the chat window, that would be very helpful for me. So thank you very much for doing that. So over the years, folks, let me get started here. Over the years at CompTIA, we've talked very diligently with people in the industry, both in companies that are not necessarily tech companies, but use technology to do their business. I'm referring to banks. I'm referring to educators. I'm referring to governments around the world. India, United States, UK, name it, we talk to them. What you're looking at is a very busy slide there, right? And these are just examples of a few of the people that I've talked with about cybersecurity. And in this particular time, we have a lot of changing tech that is impacting the security posture of companies. Let me go over the slide just a little bit. Starting up at the top left is where it says the evolving endpoint. The Internet of Things is not coming. It's here. It's been here for some time. And the endpoint has changed. By the endpoint, back in the day, I'm old enough to remember the endpoint was the PC, maybe even a terminal, right? Then 10 years ago, the smartphone came along, 10, 12 years ago. The IoT world, so cars are now IP-enabled. Everything is IP-enabled. That has changed the endpoint. We have, with the advent of this, then, a dissolving perimeter. If you look over a little bit to the right, where it says, top right, where it says dissolving perimeter. Back in the good old days, you pretty much had that physical demarcation between the good guys and the bad guys. And even though we have plenty of insider attacks, over the years we've seen that, there was still a perimeter that was kind of brought a certain kind of assurity, a certain kind of certainty. That's over with the advent of edge computing, with the Internet of Things. Internet of Things devices tend not to just communicate with, they tend not to just start communicating at your wearable clothing or with your car and then communicate directly to the company that created it. They connect with tons of, quite a few intermediate devices. That's called edge computing, micro data centers, for example, micro clouds. So with the evolving endpoint and the dissolving perimeter, with the advent of the cloud, there's no longer that defined firewall. Yeah, firewalls are still important. They're table stakes. They're still important. But that's changed. The other change is that every bit of traffic these days is more and more encrypted all the time. Therefore, it's made it more difficult to analyze that data and find out what's going on. So data and motion that is encrypted has changed the game. Again, we've got cloud and mobility and bring your own device, BYOD. We have shadow IT. Shadow IT is basically this. Shadow IT is where an organization within your company, say marketing or sales, basically says, we're going to source our own IT solution directly rather than working through the traditional IT department. Shadow IT has generally been considered a bad thing. It's like, well, as the IT or the security professional, I know what I'm responsible for. But now what's happened is you have a decentralization going on where companies are basically going, well, go ahead and source the best solution because it's available in the cloud. You can inform IT about it, but not necessarily work directly with them. This creates a certain amount of uncertainty at times if it's not managed correctly. So more and more decentralized decisions are made. The question becomes, are the security professionals and the IT professionals properly communicating with all of the divisions so they know exactly what kind of information technology solutions are happening in the first place? Then we have privacy becoming more and more of a business concern. If you do business in Europe, you're going to have to worry about GDPR. GDPR is a law that was passed, whereas I think it's in May or is it April of this coming year. If you do not take steps to define the privacy and to protect the privacy of the information that you have, you get major fines. This is important because if you do business in Europe, you have to follow GDPR. So you don't have to just live there. I don't live in Europe, so what do I care? Well, actually, we do business at CompTIA with a lot of Europe. Therefore, it's a problem. Same with anybody in India. These are examples, okay, of how the landscape has changed. And the question becomes, how do we manage this risk? Because more and more, it is not about how much money you spend on security. I've had many discussions over the years. Well, we spend $200 million or $10 million if it's a small company, or $300,000, or we spend a percentage of our gross national product, a percentage of our revenue on security. That doesn't matter anymore. Nobody cares about how much money you've spent on security. What they care about is how do you have the ability to pivot resources quickly and effectively by doing risk management. So what's happening more and more is because attackers are able to compromise systems easier, because of all of these factors here affecting the security posture, you have to come up with meaningful company-specific, company-custom metrics. You can use the word bespoke. It's a fancy word for customized. So that you can say, here are the controls that we're implementing, and here's the return on investment. And you have to work with the board and with the CEO and the CIO to basically say, here is our risk management process, and here's how we're going to avoid communication silos, because hackers thrive in communication silos. It's kind of like a weird example here. It's kind of like rats in a building. They love the little spaces where nobody goes. They love to hide there. That's where they set up home, right? Hackers are kind of the same way. Whenever there are little areas where people are communicating just fine, but there are little forgotten areas, that's where the bad guys tend to show up. So we need a new approach to risk management that's custom tailored to your organization as a security professional. Your job is to combat these asynchronous threats, these new threats, and to identify indicators of compromise, and then find ways to pivot resources so that those compromises don't happen. And indicators of compromise, very important concept, basically means evidence left behind by an attacker. Any attacker, this is from a concept that's been around in law enforcement and in IT for 100 years. It's called Lockhardt's exchange principle. It's an old principle, and it simply means this. Whenever a bad guy comes into a crime, I don't care if this is a physical crime on the street or a cyber crime, that person comes in and brings things to the scene and will leave things behind. And it's our job as security professionals to identify those things that are left behind, and which are indicators of compromise, and then learn how to take action. Doing so helps our risk management stance. It helps our risk management process. It also allows us to set up so that we can ensure the privacy of data in our companies. Got to keep our company data private for a couple of reasons. One, it's our company data, and our data is the identity of our company, and it's the value of our company. Data is also, again, through law enforcement and through rules and all sorts of things, and our customers, very important to keep safe. And so this is very much a business process sort of thing. And risk is really where you take the processes, where you take the technology, right, where you take the people and put them all together and do it right. So the older risk management strategy, folks, tends to be compliance. If you're a company that takes credit cards, there's PCI, at least in the United States. You have to follow certain rules. There are many companies that have been hacked recently. Starting 3 years ago, when Target was hacked in the United States, they were PCI compliant. They had complied to the rules. There's a hospital that I know that got hit by ransomware, and they paid the ransom. They still lost all their data, but it's a long story. Healthcare people, they follow all sorts of rules worldwide. In India, you have your own laws. The United States has their own laws. Germany has their own. There are companies over and over again that have followed the laws to the letter. They still get hacked. A more modern approach, in addition to compliance, in addition to following laws, obviously, is this activity of threat hunting. So for those of you who joined in, it's like, well, when is he going to talk about threat hunting? Here we are. It focuses on the ability to pivot resources and take action based on indicators of compromise, and more importantly, you think proactively. You already assume that your company has been hacked, and you look for these indicators of compromise. So it really starts with human judgment. I've been asked many times, hey, what's the killer app in regards to risk management or threat hunting? And my answer is your brain, critical thinking. The value is in the person, not the software. This is generally not something that can be automated. We have great automated tools, and I realize artificial intelligence is on its way. It's here in many cases. Right now, the automated approach of intrusion detection systems, if you're using the open source tool called Snort, for example, or if you're using one of the great vendor products that are out there, there are many. That's an automated tool that brings you to the table and helps you, but does not replace an active brain, smart brain, looking around and looking for these gaps that I'm talking about. And so they're proactive. They're not reactive. They don't focus on alerts or virus signatures or firewall rules or anti-intrusion detection signatures. they focus on threat intelligence. The question becomes, is threat hunting kind of a buzz phrase? Is it something that, okay, that's a little hip, it's an interesting little idea, but is it real? Well, it actually is something. You can go into job descriptions and find references to the idea of the kill chain, idea of the threat hunter. The threat hunter focuses on something like the hacker life cycle. If you've heard that phrase before, the hacker life cycle, or in this case, the concept of the kill chain. Lockheed Martin employees years ago came up with the concept of the kill chain. They didn't really come up with it. They kind of stole it from I think from the United States military. It was a concept that the military used, and a bunch of IT workers and security workers at Lockheed Martin aerospace company back in 2010 coined the phrase kill chain for the rest of the world. They borrowed it. It's still a pretty valid model. It tends to be a little perimeter focused. It kind of doesn't take into as much consideration that idea of that we have, that the firewall in many ways has changed because of the cloud. But it still is a very relevant idea of the hacker lifecycle. It focuses on finding the advanced persistent threat. And the persistent threat, folks, means an attacker who comes into your company long term. In many cases, we've seen smash and grab kind of attacks, denial of service attacks, for example, or times where the attacker revealed themselves as an attacker by revealing important information from movie studios like Sony or whatever. The real problems, folks, are these low and slow attackers who have persistent threats that are in your system and you're just not aware of them. They're flying below the radar. They are basically somebody, and my favorite analogy is, traditionally, if somebody were to walk up to your house, smash a window, run in, grab something, and run back out, right, or your apartment, right? That's a smash and grab idea. The advanced persistent threat person, it's much creepier. It's much more dangerous. Imagine somebody sneaking into your home and kind of living in the home with you, and you're not aware of it. That's what the companies today, starting in 2010, are worried about. And this hacker life cycle is described in the cyber kill chain in 7 steps, from reconnaissance to weaponization to delivery of the attack, exploiting systems, installing in further systems, obtaining command and control, spreading to other systems, and then they basically, I don't know what that's all about. Sorry, start over again. So the idea, folks, is that you have a cycle of attacks. There's another company, a person I know, for example, he talks about the hacker life cycle as reconnaissance. Then they attack systems, they penetrate the systems, they move laterally from system to system, they take control, and then they start stealing data, and that's called egress. Then they cover up their tracks. So there's a whole cycle here. Threat hunters have to learn these types of cycles. A friend of mine in a major retailer in the United States put together this very good matrix. I didn't come up with this. I'm not that smart. But he basically said, how can we find the attack life cycle from the initial compromise to where the hacker establishes a foothold, where they escalate privileges, one account to an administrative account, a normal account to an administrative, where they do internal reconnaissance, where they move laterally from one system to the next, and they maintain their presence and complete their mission. That's another example of a hacker life cycle, very similar to the cyber kill chain. What he's doing is he's customizing the hacker life cycle to his own company. He realizes that the hacker life cycle is a generic concept. You have to customize it to your own company. And then he basically puts together mitigating concepts, mitigating controls, to detect and respond to each of the steps. This is what a threat hunter does. This is what people who are really doing risk management do all day long. They don't just say, okay, what are the important controls? What are the software vendors selling me? Or what is it cool to implement? Or what am I hearing about in the street? You have to figure out your own company's problems and then apply the controls correctly. You can use all sorts of cybersecurity frameworks. There are dozens of them out there, hundreds really. There's the NIST stuff from the United States. There's COSO. There's many. There's ISO, worldwide standard. You have to customize these things to your own company, because each company is different. And if you just apply a generic rule, you're going to be in trouble. So where does this fit in? I already talked about Lockheed's exchange principle, and I'm going to move a bit faster now. What does this mean? You have to apply and map your controls. By controls, I mean, let's say an obvious one is a firewall or intrusion detection systems or SIMs, right? Security, information, and event monitoring software. And you have to apply these resources to your essential resources. Those essential resources are different from company to company. It might be that SharePoint server, might be that WordPress server, could be e-commerce stuff, database, whatever. And then you have to apply processes properly. This means that as you are a risk manager, as you're a threat hunter, you no longer are just that cowboy coming in like Clint Eastwood. I love Clint Eastwood movies, but you're not coming in as a movie cowboy anymore. You're not just Gandalf the wizard or the guru. You are now the cyber detective. More and more as I talk to people in the industry, you're the cyber detective. You deduce and find problems. You're kind of, to use a Western-centric metaphor, you're kind of Sherlock Holmes. Or you are the guide. Imagine that's me climbing Mount Snowdon in the UK. You're following a path, and you're helping people use the right tools so you can get up the mountain or go along the trail. The team captain, right, for all you footballers out there, or rugby, or for that matter, cricket. You're the team captain where you coordinate and pivot resources. Those are the newer mindsets of the threat hunter. The threat hunter then learns how a business works. And I can't emphasize that more. You learn, and you gain a clear understanding of the endpoints on the system. That means all the IoT devices, all the phones, all of the IT, all the desktops, etc. You learn networking best practices that constitute a network. So you then learn about how the network works, endpoints and also network infrastructure. More importantly, you learn how information flows from one system in that network to another, because that's what hackers are doing too, and you find out what's going on. So you're basically creating hypotheses, and you're engaging in a kind of loop of thought, and then you look and you investigate network systems or endpoints to look for patterns, and you look for indicators of compromise. Some people call it TTPs. I call it indicators of compromise. And then you do some analytics, and you start over again. And you look through the infrastructure of your system. You look into the developers. If you have a company that is focusing on code development, then you need to make sure how those code developers are working. So you implement security on your data. So as that information flows, and then as you focus on the technical elements that allow that information to flow and where it is stored, you then learn how that information can be interrupted and, more importantly, manipulated. Then you look for new network traffic. You look for new processes on the system, dropped files. These are all examples of indicators of compromise. Connections to strange places at strange times, or strange places at normal times. The threat hunter then reports these types of issues, if he or she feels it's a problem, to the secure operations center. That's what a SOC is, secure operations center. You work with blue team and red team. That's supposed to be red team, not read team. Sorry about the typo there. You work with management and the board, and you suggest solutions. Most importantly, a threat hunter looks for what I call interstices. That's a fancy word for gaps. You look where in between places where one technology and another connect. Here, let me give you a couple quick examples. Most obvious examples, instant messaging and or email and people, where people, that's what I mean by meet space, us, right, and cyberspace converge. So a business email compromise where somebody phishes the CEO, or more relevantly, the CEO's assistant, and gets information, or is able to conduct a wire transfer, any of those sort of things. It's where industrial control systems and SCADA systems that control physical devices, factories, refineries, utilities, interconnect with cyber tools or with computers. That's where hackers go and attack. Physical access to a building, where people walk into a building, that's where there's gaps can form, and that's why we put biometrics in place or whatever to try to control those gaps. There are many different examples that I won't go into, but this concept of interstitial security, of in-between places, very important thing for where the threat hunter manages risk. So I want to hear it. Do you think that threat hunting is kind of a buzz phrase to you, or is it a real job role or activity? Just curious about your opinion. Give us your opinion. Give me your opinion, and then take some time after this presentation and look up that concept of threat hunting in the job bulletin boards that you know of. In the States here, it's DICE and Monster and Indeed.com. It's all around. So critical security skills are the ability to identify patterns, pattern recognition. Data analytics, where you analyze and enumerate networks, or you analyze and enumerate issues. You do vulnerability analysis, so you use a tool like Nessus, for example, or my favorite, OpenVAS. There are various tools that you can do to conduct vulnerability analysis and pen tests. And then this is where threat hunting comes in. It's where you're combining red team pen testing with blue team analytics. That makes you a threat hunter. There's a little bit of data forensics there. You don't become a data forensics specialist, but you do take a look inside of files. For example, the netstat command, I'll just use that as an example. A Trojan on a Linux system will often take over that command and others, where it looks like it's behaving normally, but it's actually compromising security. It has a Trojan in it, might be an illicit server that allows hackers to come in and attack a particular system and take it over and steal data. These are examples of the kind of forensics that you're going to need to be able to do on a Linux, not on a Linux system, but on your networks. So you get a deep understanding of how systems work together in your environment. This is not a theoretical understanding. It has to be practical based on your own company. So for example, accounting and human resources. You basically look into what they're doing and how it's working and what could go wrong. You look at installed systems, especially SCADA systems, which are that's one of the technologies that makes it possible for automated systems like robots, for example, that are on a factory line to work together. So you understand how the process of your business works, and you also bring something to the table yourself. You need to understand how to resolve incidents. You need to understand how to look, what I say, look around the corner of a problem. In other words, you look at a situation and you say, tomorrow I can see where that's going to become a problem. And then you assist teams. If there are already existing blue teams or red teams, I work with a lot of small businesses where it's one or two people wear a lot of different hats. One or two people have to and sometimes become the pen testers. Sometimes that same person has to become the analyst. Sometimes that person is a one-person security operations center. If you work for a larger company, then obviously you have different teams. But it's the understanding that you coordinate and assist with teams to help improve security. So a threat hunter already assumes you've been hacked. It sees the network as a hunting ground, and it wants a picture of the whole environment. A threat hunter does not believe that security is good enough. This is a little survey we did. There are a lot of IT workers out there who kind of think, hey, we're done, we're fine. You're not. If you have that attitude, you're probably in trouble. So you have to take along this observe and orient yourself and decide. You have to take this basically approach where you're constantly thinking, observing and orienting yourself, and you decide what's working and what's not, and then you take actions to apply skills. You have to be very aware of your world. This is, I don't know if you can see this through the resolution on your screen, but these scuba divers are not situationally aware. They're saying, hey, everything's great, and do you see what's behind them? A very, very large shark. This could be photoshopped, doesn't matter. The point is, as you are an IT worker, are you situationally aware? Have you managed your risks to where you think everything's fine, and you really are, or is there a big hacker or a big shark behind you lurking in the deep? So you have to find the context and understand your operations. And so you engage in threat intelligence. That means, in a sense, you go out there and find out, for the systems you have in your network, what are the most obvious and, I won't say the word obvious, what are the most dangerous threats, and how can you counter them? And by countering them, you can apply controls. Or you can say, well, we're going to do cyber insurance instead of, so you can basically say, well, we think that's going to be that's going to happen, and I'll take that liability and I'll defer it to insurance. Or if there's a liability or a problem there, we're going to implement a security control to make that risk go down. You can engage in behavioral analytics. We have noticed over the years, all the people that I talk with, that end users obviously are a major, they're the major target. So you need to engage in user behavior analytics in your company to make sure that, to identify where those attacks are coming in the most. And then you can educate users. You can change processes, business processes, so that that problem is lowered, that risk is lowered. So you use informed hunches, and you have an innate sense of curiosity, because you don't want to you don't want to have somebody come up behind you like a photo bomb. That's a term where somebody gets into your picture and does something behind your back. You don't want to have that happen in a hacker sense. Here's another example. A couple of footballers were taking a picture and the Queen of England photo bombed them. I think that's a good. As you engage in threat hunting, you basically engage in some interesting terminology. The customer is the beneficiary of the attack. If there's an attack going on your company and somebody wants it to happen, that customer might be somebody who's not even technical. They might employ a gang of people to attack your company. So the adversary is the operator. That person could be an internal worker, a disgruntled, unhappy internal worker. It could be a gang of outside workers. And so what they're going to do is they're going to use some form of infrastructure, maybe your own company infrastructure. They're going to use their own to wage the attack. Then they are going to use a capability, some tools to wage the attack. And then there's a victim. That would be you. So that customer is the beneficiary of the attack. It might be the same as the adversary, but oftentimes they're separate. These are the kinds of terms that are used in the concept of threat hunting. There are companies that are more mature than others in threat hunting. This is something I stole from, I used from SANS. They have some very good articles about what threat hunting is. SANS is a security organization. And they basically put together levels from 0 all the way to 4. I would argue that most companies are at the 0 or 1 level. If you're really lucky, you might be at the HMM2 procedural level, okay? Most companies are happy if they have automated alerting, and most companies really don't have much of a routine. And I would argue that more and more companies are getting up to HMM1, right, where they incorporate a little bit of threat intelligence and they have a little bit of routine. The goal is to get as high as possible, but it's very costly, okay? So it's the hunting maturity model. And the whole idea, folks, is that you basically move to create an architecture and move from a passive defense to an active defense, and the ability to gain intelligence and take on an offensive capability against the hackers. There are various types of threat hunting out there, folks. User-centered, which is where you look at the job responsibility of people. Then you see, well, the more important the responsibility, the more likely that there's an attack, or the more likely that a successful attack could bring the company down. So you focus on problem users or problem processes, focused on users, and then you try to solve the problem. Another way to do it is you focus on capability. What's the business function of a system? What's the business use? And then you try to solve it. There's infrastructure where you focus on the equipment. I find capability is very useful as well as user. And there are various reasons why you would approach any one of these three, user, capability, or infrastructure. But I find that the user-centered is the most useful at many times. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move on here a little bit. What are the hackers after? Well, it depends on your company. Right? If your company is focusing on a certain thing of value, they're going to go after that, or at least the processes that support that thing of value. Oftentimes, they're after personally identifiable information, so they can sell it on the dark web, or they can further manipulate the company. Accounts information. They want to control SCADA systems to either wreak havoc or to engage in ransomware to make your company pay a lot of money to get their systems back. Or they're after a company's reputation. They collect information. A good threat hunter collects information from multiple resources and turns what I was talking to one person who says, well, there's so much information, it's like a sinkhole. You just kind of get lost in it. You turn that sinkhole of information into actually very useful, actionable data. So you manage risk through deep packet inspection. that means you get into the packets, and then you investigate architectures, you gather intelligence, and you view behavioral analytics and vulnerability data and look for indicators of compromise. And then you go into this loop here. It's a meaningful loop. It's not an infinite loop. So it's a loop that basically allows you to engage in proper threat hunting. So the software that you might use helps you look at trends. It looks inside of IP sessions, but it does more than just show you a bunch of data. It then turns that data into trends and information. So it gives you a dashboard of the network. It reflects the heartbeat of the network, and it finds out, you find out who is talking to whom and where, and it creates context. When it comes to risk management and security, you need to engage in the smart use of visuals. This is a picture that I took while I was in Scotland here a couple of months ago. It's a place called the Quirang. It's a really neat hike, and you can see there's a very rough trail that goes up to this little place called the Needles. Oh, no, this is the Needle. Take a look at the little map there where it says the prison, right? And then it says Quirang and Needle, right? Which is most useful to you as a hiker? Well, the map is very useful because it shows a trail. It shows the features. The picture could also be useful because it's very difficult to tell from a map exactly what something looks like. You can tell from the topography or the topographical map that, the closer the lines are, the steeper something is. But sometimes a picture tells 1,000 words or is more useful than the map. But you can't use these in isolation. I'm coming up with an analogy. A good visualization tool for a risk manager or a threat hunter combines that topographical map idea with a picture so that you can come to a quick understanding of your network and understand interconnections. And once again, pivot resources and make decisions. This allows the board or the CEO or the CIO to quickly make decisions about how we can help control the hacks that are happening. And I won't say stop the hacks. It's really more managing them and trying to manage them away rather than just stop them. Which is more useful, in your opinion, if you wanted to show somebody about a BitTorrent, illicit BitTorrent server in a network? A packet capture, that Wireshark packet capture, or this other more visual tool from a open source tool called Ether8. You can download it, ether8.org, I think. I would argue that if you wanted to show somebody who's less technical, this kind of picture saying, look, there's a lot of traffic here. The larger the circle, the bigger the traffic. And we know where it's starting and we know where it's stopping. That's pretty useful visualization. So the more you visualize risk for your boss, that the more you can look inside of IP sessions and then get information and then show connections and explain the business use and explain the business issue at hand, that will allow you to get the resources you need. It will allow you to do your job better. Because even the CIOs of companies sometimes are not interested in the technical issues. They want to focus on solving the business issues. So with visualization, this is an open source tool called CompTIA. And what I'm trying to show is that this allows you to combine kind of that topographical map approach with a visual that can show trends. In this case, you have a trend of where traffic, pretty much as usual, will go from, this is 1600 to 1800, 1806 in the afternoon, right, to 2000. Notice the traffic is staying the same. And then it goes down at night, and then it starts coming back up, right, during the day, as you might expect. I would argue, at 10 o'clock or 2200, which is, if I can get it right here, 20 is 8 o'clock, 2200. It's interesting that traffic would stay that high. If this is login traffic requests per second, it's a little high there. That's a little suspicious, right? But take a look at the next one here. This is an example of login requests that I get. I sanitized it. The idea, so that you couldn't tell the company that I was working with. Notice that you have at 9:20 in the morning, you have a lot of requests. Less at 10 o'clock, that's break time for some companies. Maybe 11 o'clock, a bit of a break. Notice that you have, majorly going down just before noon and then starting again, right? So clearly there's some sort of event here. Is it lunch or whatever? You have to, through your visualization, map this this visual to how your business processes, your business works. this allows you to identify patterns and do user behavior analytics. This is interesting here, I thought. You have at 1600 traffic going way down, right? Well, that's because people are going home. You know, by 2000 people are home, midnight, right? You get into Wednesday. Notice at 8 o'clock the traffic starts up again. Notice that little anomaly there right around, I would argue, what, about 2, 3 o'clock? You know, a little blurb, that little blip here. I find that really interesting. That was an indicator of attack. That was somebody coming in well after business hours and doing some interesting things. We were able to identify that. As a threat hunter, you look for various types of compromise. By intelligence, in other words, you go out and say, well, we have these types of systems in our company that we think are the highest risk. Let's say some WordPress sites. So we could go out and do intelligence or behavior-based analytics. They're both useful. One's not necessarily better than the other. Intelligence means, well, I've got a particular version of WordPress. I'm going to go out and find out for that particular version of WordPress what the hackers are doing to it lately, what attacks are available. That's a very useful thing. But you could also look by behavior and see, well, who's logging on, who's not logging on, what accounts are being used. That's more behavior-based. They're very useful. And then you ask yourself what the adversary is doing. Well, is somebody conducting scans of the system, reconnaissance? Are we in the middle of an initial compromise? Are people moving from one system to the next laterally and taking over systems? Are they stealing information? The fancy phrase for that is data egress. So there are two ways to go about doing this. So with behavioral analytics, you can do network behavior analytics, kind of like what I was showing earlier, showing traffic anomalies or traffic patterns. And you can look at user behaviors, you know, how are specific users working, and you can model those. Increasingly, we'll see artificial intelligence help model data, user behavior, and then we can take that information and start making decisions. And AI one day will start making decisions for us. I don't think it'll replace our jobs necessarily. I think it'll, at least in the short term, it'll simply help us. So moving along, the baseline that you will set up is where you do an inventory of various systems and devices in your network. These devices or endpoints are also network connectivity devices, and of course the resources that you use. And by resources, I mean, let's see, yeah. Basically, you're using resources that are important to your system. So you do a software inventory as well, not just a physical one, but layer 7 is very important, the applications. Then you configure, you secure configurations, et cetera, and move on. This is an example of baselining. Then you look for outliers, and you have to ask yourself, are those outliers, is that outlier important, or is it just, you know, something to ignore? You have to figure that out yourself, and a threat hunter doesn't just ignore it or accept it. It has to go in and investigate it. So you engage in endpoint monitoring. Some of the problems with endpoint monitoring are, this is very controversial. Some people think agents, well, they don't take up much room or much time, but there are a lot of times where security workers want to install agents for antivirus and agents for monitoring and agents for intrusion detection. After a while, you got so many agents, they can conflict with each other, they can cause problems. I don't know if they can slow systems down. It's happened. But you have to basically, sometimes they're dissolvable agents, by the way. In other words, they work for a while, then they just kind of destroy themselves. And good guys and bad guys use these. But the question becomes, in what way will performance be impacted? Either your performance as a threat hunter, as a risk manager, or even the performance of the machine. Well, what are the killer apps of the threat hunter? Well, you are. There are other systems. I was talking to a threat hunter and also to an analyst who said, hey, the Excel spreadsheet is the killer app because it allows me to create tables to identify to the CEO what the problems are. But there's VirusTotal, Squirrel Data, Endgame, NTOP, very useful tools. NTOP, very nice little tool that allows you, it's not considered a security tool particularly, but it is very good at showing trends over time. It can also show connections of networks and that sort of things. So you can engage in hypothesis-based threat hunting as well as situational threat hunting. Hypothesis meaning, well, let's see, we have a particular situation. I'm going to make an educated guess. Situational is where you basically say, well, our company has recently purchased another company. That other company has a lot of SCADA systems or a particular type of system. Let's investigate that because that's a new element coming in. We have a new situation. Let's go take control of it. Well, what happens next? You make recommendations next to the security operations team, to the incident response team. And remember, the incident response team is not necessarily just all techies. That's going to be a PR person in there, legal, representatives of HR, certainly representative from the CEO or the board. You'll be talking to the, in a larger company, the chief security officer, always the CEO and the board. One of the things I'll make a real quick applied example. I was once talking to a person who was working on a conveyor belt controller system that was compromised by ransomware. He discovered that this controller system, which controlled a conveyor belt system that was very critical, it was about 4,000 pounds an hour that this conveyor belt was making for the company, and that had been compromised by ransomware. He noticed this because network traffic protocol was suddenly being used by this controller. Most SCADA systems use GPS, not NTP. They use the GPS controller gets its time from the satellite, not from the network time protocol. It was the hacker system that was using NTP. And it was causing some bandwidth. So he said basically this ransomware got installed on a PC because a lot of the workers were surfing the web on the PC that was controlling the internet control, the ICS system, the conveyor belt. So the downtime costs were very expensive, 4,000 pounds an hour. So the solution, obviously, get the people to stop browsing. Management liked it, but the union objected. Why? Well, you can't tell my union people what to do, right? And in other cases, you might say, well, that doesn't apply to my country or whatever. But there are always cases where one party doesn't want to do what the security worker recommends. So the creative solution was, okay, we're going to give everybody their own tablet. They can surf on that tablet. The tablet surfs, gets on the internet via a completely different network, and then they stop using that system, that Windows system that was controlling the ICS system. Everybody was happy. It was a cost-effective solution. So the effective skills, folks, of a risk manager, of a threat hunter, security analytics, yeah, understanding threats. They understand endpoints. They understand how to use logging software and information event managing software. They know the business. They can do a bit of forensics. They understand how vulnerabilities work. They can collaborate well with various teams. They can project manage themselves and the company out of problems. A lot of soft skills, folks, not just technical skills, but soft skills. Security Plus 501, for example, is Security Plus is a certification that CompTIA offers. Notice that it focuses, for example, on threats, attacks, and vulnerabilities, a bit on tools, of course, but risk management is its own approach. The whole concept, folks, here is of a threat manager, threat hunter, of a risk manager, is that you apply these kinds of skills. So I talked to myself just a few minutes over. I think for the last 10, 15 minutes, we want to answer any questions or what have you. I can give other elements of the presentation and spend some more time. But if you want, there's the latest articles and blog entries that I've done. I did an article here a while back, last month, using an open source tool. It's freely available called Yara. You can use it on a Linux system or a Windows system to detect malware. It's an interesting, obviously malware can be detected by antivirus, but again, if the antivirus tool can't find it, you can go do it as a threat hunter yourself. So there are various articles that I've written, various interviews that I've done. If you want to follow me, again, you can follow me on Twitter at James Stanger. I often give presentations and I put them up online so people can grab them. You can also go to CompTIA.org, certification.comptia.org, and learn more about CompTIA and also about my activities there. This here is, I like to take risks myself. This is my son and I playing out in the ocean. Notice a little spout there that's spouting up. Just after we left that picture, a big wave came up and swept the whole thing off. So thank goodness we left in time. I guess that means I was situationally aware. Does anybody have any particular questions, folks, that you'd like to ask?
Well, first, I want to say thank you. That was a wonderful talk. It made me want to put my little sleuth hat on and go out and start investigating.
Yeah. You know, it is really, it's an interesting set of tools that the threat hunter has, you know, and or the risk manager has, you know, and it's something that anybody can bring to the table as long as they have the technical, the business skills, business process skills, and the people skills to, you know, kind of put it all together.
Okay, and that's actually one of the questions I was going to bring up is, because you were talking a lot about, well, you talked about a lot of things. You covered a huge amount of area. Domain versus skills that you pick up in the classroom that you can bring your company or yourself to versus people skills. I mean, obviously some of them you need to be with, you know, you can't learn something unless you're actually doing it, and you do that by being in a company and working with people. But certainly you can go out there and start building these skills as you need them. What would you suggest for somebody like that who does want to become a super sleuth?
You know, one of the first things is we learn by doing, so find a mentor if you can, right? Find somebody who engages in some of these types of activities. And a lot of these guys tend to be a bit shy for various reasons, just by nature. I think a lot of techies are. And a lot of them also are busy, but find somebody in the company that understands at least the concepts and the practices and get to know him or her. And that's what I did 20 years ago. I just started going in and kind of asking questions around and learning more about it. The other thing that you can do is, again, it's really important to understand how business works. So learn more from non-techie people about, you know, how businesses work, how decisions are made in a company. And as you can combine that technical and that business ability, you will do well. Learn this. We are techies, I assume all on this call. We get hired for our technical skills, our techie skills. Chances are we're going to get promoted because of our business skills. So we talk tech and get hired, and then we get promoted because we talk and do business. You combine those, and you're there. So practically, first of all, there are classes. We don't offer them necessarily, but there are classes in threat hunting. You can do that. But get to know people, get into those circles, create a plan, and then you could get into these and talk with these folks off and on. You'll find that they will be very willing to share information as long as they don't think they're getting hacked. You know, that you're trying to do something. But if you you know, gain their trust, get to know them, buy them a coffee, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Excellent. And again, we have the Q&A over there. So if you have any, you know, personal questions, there's a couple more here. We have time for a few more in addition to what I got already down. You mentioned HMMO 1 to 4, the different levels of security, and that the cost increase goes up. And you kind of tied that into, I know from more on a different side of my own side that, you know, it's like 1,000 light bulbs. You're never going to have a perfect 1,000 light bulbs light up. So if you have all but one, you ship them out because you'll never do business if you wait for that last light bulb in a production setup. And then, so can you talk to us a little bit about the cost, and it may be too broad of a term, of an HMMO from 1 to 4 and how that goes up versus taking out insurance? What kind of insurance would you even take out on that?
That's a great question. You know, you can find insurance companies that will pretty much insure anything. And there are a couple observations. One, when it comes to the risk, you always identify a resource, and then you ask yourself, what will that do to my business if it gets compromised or taken out? And then you ask yourself, well, if it gets compromised or taken out, it costs the business $10. Well, not that big a deal. Okay, we'll absorb that. So you can just absorb it. Just go, well, that's the cost of doing business. We'll be fine. If it's something that's like, we're going to lose a whole day of business, right, and that could compromise our company to the point where we won't be profitable that month, then you ask yourself, okay, how much money does the company make in a month? Let's say it makes $1 million in a month, right? Well, after employee costs, after the cost of rent, the cost of doing business, let's say the company profits $500,000 a month, right? So you then identify, well, how much does it cost to replace that system and all that? You start identifying system replacement. You start identifying redundancy solutions. And so you basically will say, well, if there's $500,000 of profit at risk here, you don't want to spend $500,000 on it, but there's a percentage of that you will look at. You will also look at the cost of duplicating that system. And if you find that, well, it costs about $30,000 to implement controls or implement a backup, that's a complete backup. Well, $30,000 versus $500,000 to reduce that risk to a point where we really aren't worried about it anymore. That's well worth it. From an HMM 0 perspective, where you have no processes and you're just relying on a few alerts, you have to consider the cost of getting hacked is much higher than the cost of your solution. So I would argue that when it comes to costs of just a few alerts, you can do something and have somebody put together a set of alerts and things and have that HMM 0, designation fairly inexpensively, for 10 hours, 20 hours of a person's time to implement the system. That's not good enough. To move from 0 to 1, I think you're going to start implementing various intrusion detection systems. You're going to start implementing a threat hunting regimen where a dedicated person spends, say, 30 hours a month, looking around, identifying problems and identifying where things are. So, putting together that kind of hourly rate for a security worker, and you're in your region, you will have an idea of what that security worker will work at, how much that security person will cost. There's some software that you might need to purchase. A lot of open source software is available. So start looking at the time that the person that you're going to rent or buy, or when I say rent or buy, in other words, hire them full-time, or maybe they'll come on as a contractor. You'll need that, plus you'll need to dedicate training of existing security workers to understand threat hunting. So you have to put together those costs. That will get you to a HMM 1 level. You start getting into the 2 level, now you're having to segment networks to create resilience. You're going to have, and also better opportunities for monitoring. You're going to have to, so there's a lot of infrastructure work. By infrastructure work, I mean you're going to have to hire somebody who really knows how all those systems work together. You're going to have to get good scanning and vulnerability management software and a good program for monitoring that. So now you're talking about 3 times the cost, I would say, at HM0, right? HM1. And to move into HM2, I would say it's from 3 to 10 times the cost as you move up. And so you have to ask yourself, if you make $500,000 a month, how much of that can you spend on, moving your way up into that threat hunter, being able to pivot resources better. Because if you don't, you'll end up losing that profit altogether. So you have to get the right percentage. A lot of people will say, well, a 6% margin of that 500K is something that we would look at as spending to make sure that we are improving our threat hunting. So there's a few ideas, a few kind of a calculus of how people do threat hunting.
Okay, that was excellent. That's certainly kind of an exponential growth there too, if you get out to the higher level.
Yeah. And there are other things you can do. You can take existing employees and turn them into threat hunters. And if you already have a good infrastructure, then that cost is gone. But most companies don't. They just don't.
Okay, and I have we have time for maybe one more question. I have Mohammed asking, what are the prerequisite certifications that are required to be a threat hunter?
That's a great question. Nobody has defined what those prerequisites are. So for me to say, okay, here they are, that is what you have to be a threat hunter, I can't say that. I would argue, though, that the first thing you have to do is understand endpoints. Then you have to understand networks. So you could argue A plus network plus. A plus is endpoints. Network plus is networks, right? Then you get into security plus to understand the security implications. Then you start learning about security analytics, right? So our analyst cert. Then you have pen testing. You learn about that. And you don't have to go the CompTIA route, guys. You can go with SANS does a great thing with their security essentials. Wait a minute, what's it called? Security. I forget the name. But there are other organizations out there that have great tools in regards to trainings in regards to penetration testing. But you have to first take the path of learning how a network, how endpoints work, how a network operates, how business works. So I would argue understanding almost an ITIL-based approach, and then understanding all the technical elements of how business works together. A+ for endpoints, network plus for networks. You go Cisco, I guess, and learn that thing. I prefer a vendor plural approach, an approach that doesn't focus on a vendor solution, but focuses on how businesses work more. But there are great opportunities out there to learn from, Cisco, Microsoft, whatever. But I would argue any program that you join that teaches endpoints, networks, how security works, how analytics works, pen testing, those are very important foundational things, foundational skills. And the more that you have an organization that teaches you how things work underneath the hood, and not so much, well, here's how the software interface works, or how the actual software works, file, new, don't worry about that, file new, open up this file and learn more about how this vendor tool works. I'm not interested in that. What I'm more interested in is how do the protocols work? How do the actual physical devices work? And how do they play well together? How do they not play well together? If you can get a good training program that focuses on that, on solutions, business-based and technical-based all at the same time, then you've got something that will prepare you to be a good threat hunter. And by the way, threat hunter, again, I don't want to get too into this buzz phrase. I'm not a buzz term, oh, that's the latest trend. I'm interested in risk management. Risk management's been a skill and a job role or a job skill that's been around for hundreds of years, or in our lives has been around for, since humanity started. How do we manage risk? What's the risk reward? From an IT perspective, focus on how risk management is taught and how risk management is implemented. If you can get those skills, then you're already a threat hunter, because you're going, based on what I'm looking at, what is at risk, and how can I apply money the smartest way so that I can get good return on investment and also manage hacks so that we're lowering risk. And those are really what threat hunters do. So there you go.
Excellent. Excellent. And it is, that's one of the things I've noticed in all of our technology, since, Simplilearn does primarily technology, is that the domain, it's so hard to go between the domain, which is going to be different for whatever company you're working with, and the skills you need. So you have to have the skills, but then you also have to learn the whole domain side of what it is you're working with. What kind of people you work with. You're doing project management, Sigma, Sigma certification, so you can work with the people better, form teams.
Sure.
Versus you're talking about endpoints and the technology of networking to connect them. Excellent, wonderful. That does bring us to the end of our hour, which I thoroughly enjoyed, even being sick at home. I'm still up and ready for it. And I want to thank you, special thanks, Dr. Stanger, for being here with us today.
Happy to be here, and thank you, everybody. I was in India a couple of years ago now, and just thoroughly enjoyed it. And so everybody have a great evening. I think it's nighttime there. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at any of the resources here that we've listed. You can grab me, IM me via Twitter, for example, or what have you. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time.
That's it. And also special thanks for Simplilearn for putting these together. If you want more information on Simplilearn, feel free to contact them either on their website, or if you filled out the list that they had earlier, they'll send you an email and connect up with you. Look forward to seeing you in our classrooms. And oh, they're awesome. I've been working with them for, over a year now. Almost a year and a half. So, excellent. Thank you very much, and have a good evening, good morning, or afternoon.
Bye.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.